Okay, everybody. So we've been talking about that we're going to study 3 different phylums of worms, and we'll go from the simplest one to the most complex. So today let's focus on one specific phylum, Phylum Platyhelminthes. Now I showed you an example of these guys in class already, the planarians. That's the one that they could chop up into pieces and it could regenerate its body parts. So let's look at a few more specific details about this phylum. There's that cute little planarian. So the common name for this phylum is flatworms, which I think that's pretty obvious why. Planarian that we already looked at, this guy right here is a tapeworm. Those are both members of Platyhelminthes. These guys are only a few millimeters thick, so really, really thin. They're very, very compressed. And that right there is something called a liver fluke, which a fluke is also a type of flatworm. Now, flatworms have tissues and internal organ systems because they have all 3 germ layers, but they don't have a coelom, and I'll keep saying that. So some flatworms can be free-living as far as their lifestyle, but most exist as endoparasites or ectoparasites. And we were talking about parasites a little bit in class yesterday. And so endo, remember that prefix endo always means inside. So an endoparasite is a parasite that lives on the inside of a body, like this tapeworm. Ecto means outside, so an ectoparasite lives on the outside of the body, like this salmon fluke or like a leech. Now let's look specifically at the structure of the flatworms. They're the simplest animal that has bilateral symmetry. Everything that we've studied so far has either been asymmetric, as in the case of the sponges, or radial symmetric, as in the case of the cnidarians. Now the tissues of flatworms develop from 3 germ layers, so they have all 3 germ layers: ectoderm, endoderm, mesoderm. Ecto is outside, endo is inside, meso is middle. I know this is a little bit of a repeat of what we talked about, but it's good to review this, and it's good to have a copy of some of this information in your notes so that if you forget about it at a later time, you can refer back to this. So organisms with only 2 germ layers, just as a reminder, are the cnidarians that we studied. They only have the endoderm and the ectoderm, so they only have very simple tissues. Organisms with all 3 germ layers can develop organs and organ systems. That's the advantage that that 3rd layer, that mesoderm, gives these creatures over what we've studied before. Now that lovely creature is a tapeworm. Now flatworms are known as acoelomates. So remember, anytime you add that letter A in the front of a science word, it means non or not. So an acoelomate is not a coelomate. It means without a coelom. And remember that a coelom is a fluid-filled body cavity, and that word cavity just means empty room. And remember that allows space for organs and organ systems to develop, which these guys don't have. So a coelom is a fluid-filled body cavity that is completely lined with mesoderm tissue, and it contains the internal organs of an animal. And you won't see the coelom, a full coelom, until we study the segmented worms, which is phylum Annelida. You're going to see a partial coelom. It's an actual cavity lined with mesoderm. You'll see that in the next group that we talk about, the nematodes. Now, no coelom forms between the tissues of flatworms, so they do have all 3, they just don't have the coelom. In the flatworms, the 3 germ layers are packed very closely together to form a solid body. There is no hollow cavity between the endoderm and mesoderm, so they don't have a coelom. Now, look at that. That's a pretty little creature. So that's a little marine flatworm. The acoelomate body with the absence of a hollow body cavity, with the absence of a coelom, gives the flatworms the thin and flattened bodies to which they are named. Now, no cells of the flatworm body are ever very far from the animal's external environment because they are so flattened. The cells of the body exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide directly with the environment through diffusion. And we've talked about this in class a few times. Diffusion is great for the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, but it does have a limit on how far, the distance that oxygen and carbon dioxide can actually diffuse. So that does limit how big these animals can get. That keeps them small. Now, as a result, flatworms do not have a respiratory or a circulatory system. They don't need those things because diffusion is sufficient to get oxygen and carbon dioxide to where they need to go. Now let's look at that body plan a little bit more specifically. So like the cnidarians, flatworms have a digestive system. Sorry, that got out of whack there. With only one opening to the outside of the body. So that was true for like sea anemones and corals and jellyfish. They had one central opening surrounded by those tentacles, and that's where food would enter and that's where waste would exit. So food enters this one opening and is digested in the gastrovascular cavity, which is quite extensive in this animal. The video clip that you're going to watch on this animal at the end of this PowerPoint, it's a separate assignment, will go a little bit more specific into why their gastrovascular cavity is so impressive. They are eating machines. Now waste is eliminated through that same opening. Probably should go back for that. That was a little fast for you. And so that opening that we're talking about is right here. And it's strange when you see the video clip too, you'll see that. So technically what you guys think of as a mouth is on the ventral surface of its body, in the center of its body. It's not at its head. So basically it would be like you guys eating with your belly button. Now there's those cute little eyes that planarians have. So flatworms exhibit something that we call cephalization, and I mentioned this word in class yesterday, and I told you that I would explain it at a later time, and now's the later time. So cephalization is only found in bilaterally symmetric animals, which this is one, and that means that all of their sensory organs, their brain, everything that they use to sense and interact with the environment is concentrated in the anterior end of the animal. So, and remember, anterior means like the front end of the animal. So that's cephalization, concentration of sense organs in the anterior end of the body. Now, free-living flatworms have organs for digestion, excretion, response to the environment, and reproduction, but that's not the case with parasitic flatworms. They tend to be more simple. They're so reliant on their host that they use the host to do a lot of those things. So parasitic flatworms are much simpler in structure than their free-living relatives. As some worms evolved into parasites, they became dependent on their host organism. So because of that, because they could rely on the host, that means it was pointless to expend the energy developing some of these other body structures. So sometimes in these animals, their body structures became very modified or even completely lost. And we'll talk specifically about the tapeworm because they have a very modified digestive system that we'll talk about. Now, very big overview, and this is the last slide, of Platyhelminthes. Now, realize you could take an entire class just on this one phylum, so I am going kind of quickly. I'm just giving you a very basic overview here. But the phylum Platyhelminthes contains more than 20,000 different species of flatworms. But there's 4 different classes. There's class Turbularia, I just said that wrong, I'm sorry, Turbularia, and it contains all the free-living non-parasitic flatworms, like the planarian that we watched the video of. There's Trematoda, which contains the flukes, okay, that are also endoparasites. Monogyna contains the flukes that are ectoparasites, and usually on fish or other aquatic animals. And then finally there's class Cestoda, which contains the tapeworms. Okay, now wrap up your notes. That's it for this lecture, and we have a couple more assignments to work on today.